everyone, and welcome to this Business Forum Group webinar, Humanizing Leadership, How to Keep Culture Alive in the Age of AI, organized by Nordic Business Forum and Oslo Business Forum. My name is Simeon, and I'm very happy to be your webinar host today. As AI is transforming the way we work more and more, one crucial question stands at the end. How can leaders actually preserve culture and human connection in an increasingly more digital world? And we have two great profiles joining us today to this webinar. I can guarantee to you it's going to be a great one. But first, let's have a look at the agenda of today. In our first session, we're going to hear from President and CEO from Kongsberg Digital, Shane McArdle. Shane will be focusing on how leaders and organizations can maximize the relation between AI and humans. Secondly, in our second session and our main session, we're going to hear from INSEAD Professor Gianpiero Petriglieri. Gianpiero is a global expert on leadership and learning in the workspace. Today, he will be diving into the question, why are we so obsessed with culture and why it is so important to keep culture alive at the workplace? So great content to look forward to. And also today, you can play an active role during the webinar by using Slido. During the talk with Gianpiero, you can actually answer, giving in questions, and we would like to use Slido from the very start. I would like to ask you, what do you think keeps culture alive at the workplace? So try to describe that in one or two words by using Slido next to the live stream or by scanning the QR code on the screen here. Today's learnings. After this webinar, we hope you have learned the following things. How leaders and organizations can maximize the relation between humans and AI. What keeps culture alive and what actually kills culture, so you know you're not doing the mistakes others have done before. What it means to lead with humanity in the age of AI. But now let's have a quick look at Slido. What do you think keeps culture alive at the workplace? We see words like engagement, commitment, purpose, meaning, love what we do, a lot of things. Keep on giving inputs here and keep remembering that you can ask questions during the session with Gianpiero Petriglieri. And now we'll get started with the first session with Shane McArdle, CEO and President of Kongsberg Digital. Shane holds a PhD from the University of Limerick and has held a broad range of roles in executive positions. He has spent most of his career working in technology and digital solutions in the heavy asset industry, which gives him a perfect, great perspective on today's topic. Shane, we will diving into how leaders and organizations can leverage and maximize the relation between humans and AI. And it's fantastic to have him live here in the studio. Please welcome Shane McArdle.
The term AI is so prevalent in today's society, and its influence has far-reaching and very profound effects. As we start to adopt AI more and more into our day-to-day lives, the impact on simplifying the tasks that we do, expanding opportunities across industries, will not only have a transformative effect on the economy, but on political landscapes and even societal structures. My name is Shane McArdle, and I'm here to talk briefly to you about how leaders and organizations can leverage and maximize the relationship between humans and AI. Today, we're throwing some of our most crunchiest problems at AI to solve, such as climate change mapping and modeling, looking at gene mapping, looking at predictions around diseases, in the hopes that this will have a more equitable access to essential services and improve our quality of life. But at the same time, these statistics are very much alarming. We're starting to see numbers like 30% of jobs being affected by AI in 2030. McKinsey's statistic, Goldman Sachs goes even further and talks about 50% of jobs being impacted by 2045. Over 80 million jobs lost in the next 5 years. And to balance that out, only 69 million new jobs are actually going to be created in this area of AI. Recently, the CEO of Anthropic came out and said 90% of all new code being written will be done by AI in the next 3 to 6 months. Very alarming numbers. We have a counterpoint view as well. from other experts saying AI is useless, it's all hype, it will never fully replace what humans do. And we have to assess as leaders, where does the truth lie? It definitely doesn't lie on the extremes today, but it's somewhere here in the middle. How do we navigate that? So first and foremost, we have to understand it's not going to be a human-only workforce of the future. It's also not going to be only an AI-driven workforce of the future. It is going to be humans augmented by AI, such as agents. In his book, Irreplaceable, Pascal Bernet talks about a story Gary Kasparov recounts to him. And for those of you who don't know who Gary Kasparov is, he is one of the world's greatest chess grandmasters. And he tells a story about how in 2005, he's at a chess tournament where there were 3 teams, all vying for the top spot. The first team was made up of chess masters, second team was made up of just supercomputers, and the last team was made up of AI plus humans. In the end, it was a human AI team that won. And this is the kicker. These people were not chess grandmasters. At best, they were chess enthusiasts. And these algorithms used by the AI and these teams were not as sophisticated as those used by the supercomputers. So there is a better together story here. If anything, we can pick up from that analogy. Together, humans and machines can increase productivity and have a higher performance across the board, outperforming who we are, people today, and outperforming machines today. Imagine, if you will, just for a moment, that as leaders, we have been successful in rolling AI out across the entire organization. It's a big task, but let's say we've done it. What are the potential opportunities here for us? So if we think here, we're looking at a bell curve. On the left, we have your number of employees inside an organization. We have our low performers or high performance, and then we have the average performance of our employees inside an organization. Today, what is achievable by just leveraging AI, the technology we have today, the capability sets that we have today across the business lines and business functions today, between 20 to 25% improvement. We can shift the average performance of an organization. That's a massive opportunity for us to be able to achieve. Right now, we're seeing some of AI being applied in areas like accounting, insurance, customer service with chatbots, support functions like HR. And the reason we're able to leverage AI into these processes is because of 3 things. 1, very well-defined roles. So we understand the tasks that make up some of these roles. 2, large amounts of data. And 3, repeatable patterns. Those 3 points are very, very applicable and very conducive to automation. But what do we do if we haven't got such a structured process? And I'll come back to that in a minute. The last time technology had such a massive and profound impact on our society was during the Industrial Revolution. Then there was a massive upheaval in how goods were produced, services were performed. But we need to understand that the inherent or the core element of that job, the outcome of that job, didn't change. It was relatively unchanged. You were producing a bolt of wool or a cloth, you were producing metal, you were producing agricultural goods, but the tasks that made up how we produced those goods and performed those services fundamentally changed. There was a huge deleveraging of the organization, of organizations, of jobs and workforce during this time. But remember, this was over probably a 100-year period, so we had time to adjust as a society. But by every metric, even though these jobs were being changed or lost in some cases forever, by every other metric, productivity and efficiency went up across the board and quality of life went up. So how do we as leaders take the lessons learned during that time and apply them into today? So first and foremost, if we want to be at the forefront of adopting AI across the organization to be leading competitively, we need to use and apply critical thinking. We need to understand what are the tasks that make up roles across our organization. In many cases, we do not have the overview, or we have a very unstructured or siloed view of how people perform their jobs. So sitting down first and foremost, critically assessing jobs and tasks and processes around a job, starting to collect that data and starting to eke out some of those patterns associated with the job. That's the first step. Second, you have to include your workforce. you need to include them into the process of this critical thinking, because they are the people that know how these jobs are performed best. And the first area you go after, the first area you look to automate, are those tasks that make up 20-30% of a job or a role that just don't add value, just boring, repetitive tasks that are done every single day. And those are normally highly automatable. So that's the first step. Why is that important? Or sorry, that's the second step. But why is that important? It's because once you onboard your workforce, empower them, support them, and ensure that they're not just being replaced, but actually being part of the new solution and new future, you are actually reskilling and retraining your people. What we've seen when this is done successfully is a massive unlocking of creativity. So crowdsource creativity, where people, once they get over that first step, which is a scary first step, a lot of people don't know how to do it, or they feel their jobs or roles are at risk. But once they see what you're trying to achieve and you're making their jobs a little bit better, a little bit more enjoyable, this is where the fun part comes into it. The creativity starts to unlock, and they start going, hey, have you considered this? Are we able to use automation here? Can we eliminate this task because I really don't like doing it? This is how you can build success in leveraging AI and also bringing your people on that journey. So really, really important. If you manage to do this, you will be way ahead of most organizations, because even though this sounds very, very basic, there are huge gaps across companies and organizations today. We like to call this the brilliant basics, getting the brilliant basics right so you can actually leverage something like AI, which is a lot more sophisticated, at scale. Get that right. What do we need to consider as leaders? So Gianpiero Petriglieri, an associate professor in INSEAD, he has done extensive work on humanizing leadership and making your day-to-day job better in the workforce. This is so relevant right now when we're talking about AI and how it's shaping the future of work. We need to lean into those characteristics, those faculties that are inherently human, that make us better, that machines can't replicate. And there's three key areas. We talked about critical thinking. It's number one. We need to critically assess those jobs or tasks that make up our organization today. That is required. It's a human requirement to do that. We need to unlock that creativity. Look for those out-of-the-box solutions to automating what is dull or boring work, and also looking for new ways of performing that task. So you start to elevate your workforce, reskill your workforce at the same time. And then empathy. Empathy is so important right now. Being able to make judgment calls about people with very little information or data, that is something that humans are inherently equipped to do. Gianpiero, he presents a lot of data around the power of collaboration and even friendships at work, making us a much more effective organization. And what is it that can actually help us, or what can help us avoid? When we're working with something as artificial as AI, to use that pun, it can lead to fragmentation or disconnectedness from an organization, and that is a culture killer. Gianpiero talks about this. We need strategic leadership, empathetic leadership to steward us through this evolution. It's very, very important. We also need leadership that creates a sense of belonging, a sense of connectiveness. This is what is inherently human in nature, that connectiveness. Not only connecting humans to humans, but connecting humans to the technology in a more empathetic way. Getting the most out of both of these resources. If we can get this right, and we focus on what went wrong in the past, avoiding those mistakes, leveraging what we know can work now, really lean into leadership, we will outperform as an organization compared to the rest of the market. The potential is just huge. So with that, very quick few words, I'll send you back to the studio. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Shane McArdle, President and CEO of Kongsberg Digital, for this great start of the webinar. And now we're moving to our main session with Gianpiero Petriglieri. As Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior at INSEAD, Gianpiero is known for his award-winning research on what it means to become a great leader today. Gianpiero redefines leadership by focusing on people and relationships and actually not on technology. If you want to understand leadership more deeply and make a bigger impact, Gianpiero's work is the guy you need. And I'm really happy that we have him today, Gianpiero Petriglieri. I hope the connection stands. How are you doing, Gianpiero?
Great, Simon. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Gianpiero. We are so eager to learn from you. And you will be actually coming to the Nordics, right, in September. And it's fantastic. We can talk already now a bit. We are eager, and we will just jump right into my first question, Gianpiero. Why is everybody and organizations and people so obsessed with culture? Why it is so important?
Well, I think because as technology becomes more powerful, we become more preoccupied with what is uniquely human. And I think, we heard Shane talk about the numbers, right? And it depends on how you look at those numbers. People have mixed feelings. These are scary times. Many people are anxious. Will I lose my job, or will I keep my job or lose my soul? In the extremes, will we lose our lives at the hand of the machines? And these are also exciting times. Technology might help us become more efficient. Technology might help us have more reach, so that we can be liberated to think about the why. We might be able to solve problems with speed and scale that we just couldn't before. And I think, in these moments of transitions, we always feel a little displaced, a little mobile. Depending on how much power and confidence you have, you might feel a little bit more displaced and worried, or a little bit more mobile and excited. But whether you feel displaced or you feel mobile, when you're on the move, that what matters is that you have friends, and that ultimately you have a home. And I think, when you think of your friends, you hope that they will have character, that if you need them, they will be there for you. And when you think of your home, when you think of the organizations that host us for a lot of our day, we hope that they're going to have culture. Similarly, when push comes to shove, they will care for me. They will help me grow. And in times of change, you see, culture becomes a matter of life or death. And I think everyone is interested in culture. And when I look at this, I think it's for different reasons. Those at the top of organizations, the executives, what we traditionally refer to as leaders, though whether they're leaders or not doesn't depend on their position, of course, but to the extent of the trust people place in them, they really care about culture, because, of course, they think that once everyone becomes equally efficient, then how is talent, our customers, going to differentiate? Probably by looking at the cultures we stand for and that we represent. And so they think of culture as a great way to coordinate people without having to instruct them, or to motivate people without having to pay them more. If you wanted to be cynical, culture is a great control mechanism. But if you wanted to be a bit more optimistic, I think many leaders understand that it's a primary aspect of their daily work and of their legacy. Leaders are artisans of culture. And so they think about it because they want to see their spirit manifested at scale. And for those that maybe are lower down in the organizations, who are just joining, the members of the organizations, culture is equally important, but not because it's going to allow me to control the organization or leave a mark on the planet through my work. It's important because it hopefully will allow me to survive and thrive. We're all looking for a place at work, a place, not just a workplace. We're looking for a place at work. And we're looking for a place where we may discover and develop our talent. And we know that the cultures that we join are not all equal. Some will give us more room, more voice, more reach. And others might shrink us. Some might make us whole, and some might pull us apart. And so we pay attention. You see, I think at the end of the day, we we're all looking for leaders to give us pride in the past, choice in the present, and hope in the future. With their stories, with their gestures. And cultures are just a manifestation of those stories and gestures that give us all three. When we don't have that pride, when we don't have that choice, when we don't have that hope, then we disengage or we leave. And I think, when in moments of change, such as the moments we are in now, that becomes a primary concern, whether you're running an organization or whether you're a member of an organization or whether you're considering joining, leaving, or starting an organization. That's why we think about it.
Mm. I like that very much, Gianpiero. You said leaders are artisans of culture, right? I hope all leaders who are listening today, they are kind of thinking about that critically as well, right? My next question is, what does it mean and what does it take to actually keep culture alive at the workplace, right? Over a long period, and especially over a transition time where we are in, where we have so many shifts at one time, right? We're not talking about one shift. We have a technological shift, we have a generational shift, we have also a geopolitical shift. What does it mean to keep that culture alive on the long term?
Well, I think just first of all, let's sit for a second with that idea that a culture can be alive. That means it's something organic. It's or it's something inanimate that acquires a spirit, like a work of art. So the first thing I hope this conversation does, it nudges you, if you are a leader, if you think of yourself, as I hope, as one, to think of yourself less as a mechanic and more like an artist. Now, once you think of it that way, and I'm going to mix metaphors a little bit, I think about what makes something alive. Let's think from the kind of easiest, simplest manifest. What makes my body alive? Well, if I went to a doctor, they would probably say, you have a pulse, you have a heartbeat, you're breathing. And that's kind of the basic. And then you move, right? And I think a culture is similar. A culture is alive if it moves people, if it moves people emotionally, if it moves people physically, makes them feel something and do something. And then once you think of it that way, then you realize there's actually levels of vitality. So if you go to the emergency room and you've just been concussed, one of the tests a doctor will perform is they will ask you to squeeze a finger. They will ask you to react. And that's not bad. But that's a very different category of vitality than if you were looking at Usain Bolt banging his chest at the finish line of the 100 meters in 2008 at the Olympics in Beijing. There's a range of vitality. And of course, we understand that while the basics is that we are able to move, to react. Of course, what we aspire is to be able to move freely. And this is where art really helps us a little bit. If you think of what does a work of art do, it moves us. It moves us closer, and it makes us think or feel in ways that we didn't imagine. It makes us move freely. So let's take an example, Romeo and Juliet. Like, everyone would be familiar with Shakespeare play. Now, that was written in the late 1500s, and it's still alive. 430 years later, it's still alive. People perform it. People drive or walk to watch it. They pay for it. It moves you still. And people, artists, dancers, interpret it in new ways, right? And if you use that as a metaphor for culture, two things need to happen for Romeo and Juliet to remain alive for hundreds of years. People need to invest in it. The dancers, their body, and audience, their money. And then people need to interpret it. The dancers need to be free. The director needs to be free to make something contemporary with Romeo and Juliet. And the audience needs to find some kind of meaning that connects to them. If no one invested in it, if no one was able to interpret it, if no one was moved, it would stop being represented. It would die. And so I think those two things keep a culture alive: our investment and our interpretations. The fact that we say we want to be moved by this culture and that we can make something personal out of it. And I want to break it down a little bit more. When we invest in culture as a leader or as members, what is it that we're investing in? Three things: principles, practices, and people. So what is our culture? Is the principles that move us. We care about aesthetic, we care about innovation, we care about privacy, we care about maximizing shareholder values. Is the practices that we repeat, that we become masterful at. We design chips, we help organizations restructure, we make and execute investment strategies, we teach and learn. And then it's the people we look after. And of course, you don't invest in everything. You invest in certain principles, in certain practices, and certain people. And those investments reveal your culture. That's how you keep it alive. If you didn't invest, and if people didn't feel close to each other making those investments, and if people didn't feel free making those investments, the culture would probably die.
Leads me to my follow-up question, Gianpiero. You do a lot of research, right? And I would guess you have also some empirical data on what does actually makes culture die, right? When we talk about what keeps culture alive.
Yeah.
So what should our leaders now listening in the webinar, what should they do that their culture is not dying?
Make sure people are still learning and people are still moved. Learning is the oxygen of culture. Learning is how culture regenerates. Because the flip side of a culture being alive, it means that a culture can also die. And cultures do die when they stop moving, in both senses of the word. When they stop changing and when they stop moving people. A culture doesn't move, culture doesn't change. That's not interesting to invest in. That's not open to interpretation and to enactment. It's a dead culture. There's a reason why Latin is a dead language and French or English is a live language. What is the reason? Some people still study and understand Latin, but they don't speak it. They don't invent a new word. There's no such thing as selfie. In English, we invent selfie. When I grew up, the word selfie didn't exist. And that shows that it's a live language because people can make it their own and can play with it in ways that make it continue, but also change. And what I found in my research, and I actually did a study recently with a colleague, Annie Peshkam, who's a learning scientist, and we were really looking at what kind of challenges do organizations face that are not technical challenges, but are actually, cultural challenges, performance challenges. At the end of the day, a company needs to perform. And it needs to have two kinds of performances: a technical performance, technical financial performance, and it also needs to have a cultural performance. Technical financial performance means, do you deliver what you said you were going to deliver? And cultural performance means, do you embody the values you claim to stand for? And we realized there's actually three illnesses of culture. And you see them, and people talk about them is in individuals, and I'll say that in a second, but we were actually looking at them organizationally. The first one is a culture becomes too diffuse, and there's no longer a core. For example, organization has grown so fast, and there's been all kinds of different initiatives and geographical spread. We do a little bit of everything, but we don't know who we are and what's really important and what's not. And that's a risk. That's a kind of both a psychological and a financial risk. A different kind of problem is when cultures become stuck. We are so proud, we've been so successful, we become complacent, and any practice become unquestionable because that's the way we've always done it. And people become incredibly proud and incredibly scared to change things. And the culture becomes oppressive. There's no change. And the third problem is that the culture becomes fragmented. People develop different islands and there's no bridges. And so suddenly we have cultures, but we don't have a culture. And the way you see it, the symptom you see in individuals of these three challenges, the diffusion, stuckness, or fragmentation, is actually that in diffuse cultures, people feel often distracted. They don't know what to pay attention to and what to do. In stuck cultures, people feel a great deal of distress because they feel they have very little latitude. And in fragmented cultures, people feel lonely, disconnected. And guess what? I call this the 3Ds of workplace despair. And there's a lot of data, not just in my own research, but in the work of others, that show distraction is skyrocketing, fragmentation is increasing, distress is increasing, mental health challenges, and loneliness is on the rise. And maybe we could connect the rise of those three with our needs to refocus on culture at a time. People blame technology for all those three things. But maybe the issue isn't technology, it's how we are dealing with the technological revolution that is actually not making us feel focused, free, and whole.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gianpiero, for this. I just want to remind our audience that you can put in questions on Slido. We have time after our series of questions here to pick up some of the audience. So please keep on questioning in on Slido. One question I've noted myself here, Gianpiero, we have maybe most of us have been worked on in different companies. We had different leaders or had become and growing as a leader as well. But thinking about people and leaders who are obsessed with culture, is there actually a danger part that actually leaders can be too obsessed and too radicalized with culture and can actually take it over? We talked about, okay, what you need to keep the culture alive, what makes culture die, but are there actually also, is there the other end of the extreme, like leaders can be radicalized and be too obsessed with culture? What are you doing then?
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to say a few things about how do you as a leader kind of address those challenges? And I think there's some internal work. You always have to be able to discern what do you want to conform to and what do you want to confront. If you're conforming all the time, you're just replicating the culture. If you're confronting all the time, probably breaking it. And if you want to regenerate it, you have to question it. And then one important aspect of being a leader is how do you show it? What do you pay attention to? What do you talk about? For most people, the culture is in the choices you make. It's what you invest in the principles you embody, the practices you value, the people you promote. We're all looking at that. We're all looking at how leaders apportion attention, distribute rewards, allocate resources. And this is how we learn what the culture is. That's how we know that leaders care. That's how we know what they care about. That's how we know if they care at all. And of course, there's always a gap between the real culture, the stuff that goes on in the organization, and the ideal culture, which is what we would like the culture to be. And every move you make as a leader is either closing that gap, and then we'll call you a good leader, or is expanding that gap, and then we'll call you a bad leader. And as you're doing that, of course, you can pay attention to what is your culture's real issue. So if it is diffusion, really set some standards and bring people closer. If it is stuckness, invite people to free themselves up, be more empowered, innovate. And if it is fragmentation, bring people together, connect them. You should really think about what is the potential disease of my culture and how can I become the medicine? How can I become the cure? And of course, you're working for belonging and freedom. And that what makes you a good leader. Sometimes, as you say, in this effort, you become so preoccupied with your vision or with what people expect from you that you become anxious. And anxiety can radicalize leaders. What do I mean by radicalize? Your ideas become belief. Anyone who doesn't share your ideas is an enemy. And that happens because there's a lot of pressure on you to be consistent, and you can end up rationalizing being cruel. you can become, there's a lot of pressure for you to look at the whole, and so you can start becoming a little bit more distant, just looking at numbers. We all learned this in high school, didn't we, Simeon? Give any coward some power and they will become a bully. And one important part of how you don't radicalize as a leader is you make sure you have courage. And there are two kinds of courage you need. One is the courage to act, to do things, to say things, when it will be easier, safer, more convenient to be still and shut up. But that's not the only courage you need. You also need the courage to ask, the courage to question when everyone else wants you to act and agree. And you see, if you only have the courage to act, then you become a fundamentalist. You don't have any ideas, you have only belief. And if you only have the courage to ask, then you become a philosopher, which is great. But as a leader, I think you need both. And you really need practices and people that keep you human, that keep you connected to your own internal questions and to your relationships with the principles, the practices, and people, again, that make your institution alive.
I think you have answered already partly this question, Gianpiero. Our title is, right, Humanizing Leadership. So how can leaders stay human? You have talked about a bit already, but thinking about, again, the AI transition we are in, the technological also pressure, right, leaders have, and how can they stay human in this situation?
Well, first of all, remember, we are not an algorithm. Humans have the capacity to follow different rationales, to want more than one thing, and to change their mind or be of two minds, and they live in contexts that are complicated and sometimes conflicted. And so, being able to stay with all that messiness without simplifying it in some kind of, nostalgia for the past or some radical vision of the future, actually staying focused on the gesture in the present that give you choice and that give other choices is important. And for me, the answer is very simple. How do you do that? You need friends. You need friends. You need friends of your performance, people that help you continue to do what you need to do. And most importantly, you need friends of your learning. Friends of your performance will give you the courage to act. Friends of your learning will give you the courage to ask, sometimes with a joke, sometimes with a challenge. And I think when you're a leader in this traditional sense, which means when you occupy a position of power, very often we have a lot of friends of our performance, people who clap and nudge and sometimes scare us that unless we keep going, we'll be in trouble. And we have few friends of our learning, people that remind us, is this right? Is this who you want it to be? Is this what you choose? Or is this what you think you ought to do? Because the moment even the leaders are suffocated by ought, the culture begins to lose its humanity. It becomes mechanical. I heard something that Ian McGilchrist, the Oxford philosopher, said recently, and I was very touched by that. He said, the opposite of alive is not dead, it's the machine. And I think, in the theme of this webinar, I think it's usually friends. In difficult moments, it's usually friends who keep us alive, intellectually, emotionally, and sometimes physically.
Yes, thank you for that, Gianpiero. I take the chance to pick up 2-3 questions from the audience now. So the first question I take up here, which came in through Slido, is, can you advise on how to get critical thinking into the organization as a positive attribute? And critical thinking is also something, right, Shane McArdle touched on the introduction. So how can you get critical thinking into the organization?
Yeah. I think that's very important, critical thinking and also compassionate feelings, two things that, we lose when we lose our humanity. And I think what you have to do is really, challenge the last religion we have in business, which is the religion of alignment. If you think of alignment as the ultimate good rather than one of the potential things we need, then any sort of divergence become a problem. And if you think of the alignment as the ultimate good, you probably worship efficiency, and you think that a shorter time frame needs a better decision. So anything that takes time, critical thinking takes time, because otherwise it's just critique. Critical thinking means I'm thinking this through. Critical thinking means we're talking about it, and that will take time. And that is not, so the first thing you need to do, look at your language. Sometimes people say, well, but this will waste a lot of our times. No, you are investing time in thinking deeply. You are investing on learning. You are not slowing down performance. Every time you're tempted to say, well, I want to do this, but it will slow down the performance, reframe. You're not slowing down performance. You're investing in learning. And to be honest, in this day and age, any individual, any team, any company that's not investing in learning, it's at grave risk of survival.
Thank you, Gianpiero. I have an interesting other question, and it's about when two cultures, actually two companies merge with two different cultures, right? What would be your advice for a leader when two companies' cultures are merged together and cultures are very different?
It depends the kind of leader you are. If you're a mediocre leader, you will probably come up with a vision of purity, and you will try to pick the best of both cultures and make it into one and say, this is who we are, and if you no longer fit, you should leave. And I think that's a culture. I don't think it's a good culture, because it offers you belonging at the cost of freedom. And if you're a good leader, then you'll try to figure out, how can we have a vision of unity here? How can we have multiple stories in the same space? How can we offer belonging as a means to freedom? I was just talking to someone yesterday, and we were talking about this very, very challenge in an acquisition. And my first piece of advice was, as the person who's acquiring, the first thing you need to say is not how this acquisition is going to make you more efficient, it's going to make you richer. People don't really care about that. Maybe you care about that. What they really care is, will this acquisition in some significant way allow me to be freer? Will give me more choice to embody the principles I value, to practice the skills I care about, or to be the person I want to become. And so it depends. I think many leaders resort to purity in acquisition and outside acquisitions. And honestly, I think they make lousy cultures. They have to impose cultures. And some leaders are great, and they resort to unity, and their cultures are not imposed, they're inviting.
I have another interesting question I pick from the audience here, and it's, how can anthropologists be helpful in today's world? What kind of approach and research would be most useful for organizations?
Amazing question.
Anthropologists, can they be helpful?
Yeah, we definitely can. I mean, sort of any social scientist, any humanist is tremendously helpful. First of all, because of the kind of topics we research, which is beliefs and well-being, and the effect of things like culture on the way people feel and act, and the fate of their social systems, whether that's a family, a tribe, a country, or a company. But the other things that anthropologists can do is to represent a different way of examining reality. See, because when a scientist comes at reality, the way they look at it is, I'm going to make a hypothesis, and then I'm going to look at reality to figure out whether it's right or wrong, whether the data kind of confirms or disconfirms my hypothesis. And that's really important if you want to kind of answer simple A-B questions. An anthropologist goes into a tribe. They don't ask, is this tribe right or wrong? What they ask is, how do they live? what do they believe? And what do those beliefs afford them? And what do they cost them? And I think that's an incredibly important lens to examine our institutions in this very moment. It's not, are they doing something that works, that's going to sell, that's going to scale, but is it, what is it going to do to the way we live? Is it going to, say a new tech, we're going to launch a new technology. Is it going to make us more efficient? Is it going to make us more profitable? But the question is it going to bring us closer? Is it going to make us freer? And how? And I think those are the kind of questions that an anthropological mindset, which is really more focused in what unique way are we right, rather than are we right or wrong. And you see, I always remind myself, I have this cup, which I take with me everywhere, that says, are you normal? No. Because anthropologists are great at that. They are great at problematizing and complicating things that appear normal and simple, so that we can then make more choices, even within the constraints of reality.
I have one last question, time for one last question, Gianpiero, and I take this question here from the audience. How to link data-driven thinking with human touch? People first, question mark. So how can we link the data-driven age as we in now with the human touch? Is that actually possible? Shane McArdle was also talking about, right, you have to include the workforce. That's where it starts to become fun. If once they're on board, then they're on it, on the technological part, but they need to be fully integrated. What do you think? How to link data-driven thinking with a human touch?
Very easily. Very easily. Just think of yourself as an artist. People sometimes naively think, well, an artist is very different from a scientist. Absolutely not. If you look at the great artists, they are really good scientists. They understand materials, they understand chemistry, they understand mathematics, they understand perspective, but they use the science in the service of an intent. So the first thing I would say is machines can be data-driven. Humans are not data-driven. We will never be. And the moment we say we're data-driven, we kind of abdicate whatever little scrap of humanity we have left. Humans are driven by duties and by desire. And hopefully, in the pursuit of our duties, what we think we should do in the world, on the pursuit of our desires, what we want to do in the world, we will use data. We will use data so that we're not deluded. We will use data so that we're more efficient. We will use data so that we're more impactful. But the data is not driving us. And I think this is kind of one of the things that many people that are much smarter about me, about technology, much more familiar with it, have been saying all along. At the end of the day, humans have always built. We used to build with bricks, and now we build with code. And humans have, built their assumptions into their buildings and into their algorithms. And the algorithms then help us not just analyze data, but also take decisions and take action. And I think we need to remember, I very strongly advise anyone who thinks of themselves as a leader to never say they are data-driven and never not be data-informed. As a leader, you need to be data-informed. You need to use the best data at hand and the best tools you can get in order to analyze and draw conclusions from those data. But then you also need to be able to question. This is what we call ethics. And it is really, cultures often inform our ethics. You need to be able to question, what am I using that data for? How am I collecting it? And what conclusions am I drawing? What do I do? What am I trying to do with that data? Because there's always a duty and there's always a desire behind people that hide under the cloak of invisibility that data-driven offers them. And when a leader tells you, I'm being data-driven, then you're being a machine, then you can easily be replaced. And to be honest, I would rather, if we just need a data-driven input, I would rather work for a machine that for a leader that thinks about their leadership so narrowly.
Gianpiero Petriglieri, we are actually at the end already of this interesting discussion, and we could follow half an hour more for sure. But the good news are that you are joining us this fall in September in Helsinki at Nordic Business Forum, and then in Oslo Business Forum also this September. Gianpiero, it was a pleasure to have you with us today. We are very much looking forward to welcome you this fall in the Nordics. And until then, we keep in touch. Take care. And we're looking forward to see you soon. Thank you so much, Gianpiero Petriglieri.
You too. And thank you very much to everyone for showing up.
Thank you so much. Bye, Gianpiero. And actually, that concludes today's webinar already with Gianpiero Petriglieri. I just want to encourage you to take a moment and to rate this webinar on Slido. We would very much appreciate it. Thank you once more for joining us today, CEO and President of Kongsberg Digital, Shane McArdle and Gianpiero Petriglieri, and especially thanks to you who registered for the webinar. We had over 1,000 registrations. This was absolutely fantastic. And I said Gianpiero will be joining Nordic Business Forum and Oslo Business Forum this September. We hope to see you guys all there in fall. Until then, take care and goodbye.